November 18, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. The oppressive morning air was thick with moisture, clinging to everything as 16 Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighters from the 339th Fighter Squadron settled onto the steel matting of Henderson Field. Concealed scouts within the jungle's edge transmitted their observations back to Rabaul, their messages laced with a barely suppressed sense of amusement. These were not the sleek, swift interceptors they had anticipated from America, nor the agile dogfighters that might contest the Zero's aerial dominance. Instead, these were colossal, twin-engine behemoths, distinguished by their peculiar twin booms, machines that seemed to disregard the very principles of air combat they had so thoroughly mastered. To eyes accustomed to the elegant simplicity of the Mitsubishi A6M0, everything about these American aircraft appeared fundamentally flawed. They seemed excessively heavy, overly intricate, and undeniably American in their penchant for extravagant engineering. The Zero fighter had been painstakingly perfected through a process of subtraction, shedding every superfluous gram, minimizing every component to achieve unparalleled maneuverability through design purity. Yet here were the Americans, having embraced the exact opposite approach. They had added engines, increased weight, and amplified complexity. At Rabaul, the headquarters of the 11th Air Fleet of the Japanese Navy, these reports were met with a quiet satisfaction. The assessments seemed to validate a deeply held belief that had persisted since the attack on Pearl Harbor, that the Americans relied on an abundance of material wealth because they lacked the innate warrior spirit that rendered Japanese pilots invincible. Unbeknownst to any of them, this very moment would precipitate a profound paradigm shift in Japanese naval aviation doctrine. It would instigate a methodical dismantling of every preconceived notion regarding American capabilities, triggered by a single, seemingly improbable mission that would unfold in precisely 5 months. The very arithmetic of aerial supremacy was on the cusp of being radically rewritten, not through traditional aerial duels, but within a new frontier of warfare that the Japanese had never conceived. This would involve long-range precision interception, ultimately culminating in the demise of their most invaluable asset, their burgeoning confidence. This dismissive attitude had its roots several months earlier, in August of 1942, when Japanese intelligence first flagged the appearance of these peculiar new fighters in the Aleutian Islands. On August 9, 1942, two P-38E models belonging to the 34th Fighter Group had successfully downed a pair of Japanese Kawanishi H-6K flying boats, marking the inaugural destruction of Japanese aircraft by Lightnings. However, this engagement, occurring in the distant, fog-shrouded Aleutians, was largely perceived as irrelevant to the primary theaters of conflict. The initial intelligence assessment, disseminated to Japanese fighter units in September of 1942, betrayed a deep-seated institutional overconfidence. The report explicitly stated that the twin-engine configuration represented an American predilection for mechanical complexity over combat efficacy, predicting that such aircraft would prove inferior to their own fighters in any engagement demanding superior maneuverability. Among the officers scrutinizing these reports was Commander Minoru Gender, the tactical mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor assault. His documented assessment, preserved in official Navy records, declared, "The Americans, having failed to counter our Zero with conventional fighters, now resort to unconventional designs. Each added component represents another potential point of failure. The Zero," he reasoned, was a product of a warrior philosophy focused on achieving maximum results with minimal resources. These American machines, conversely, embodied the antithesis of that philosophy. The initial encounters appeared to reinforce the Japanese conviction. When P-38s commenced operations from Guadalcanal in November of 1942, Japanese pilots reported that their American counterparts seemed hesitant to engage in conventional dogfights. This perceived reluctance was interpreted not as tactical prudence, but as outright fear. The first disquieting omens emerged on November 18, 1942, the date of the initial combat encounter between P-38s and Japanese fighters over Guadalcanal. Pilots from the 339th Fighter Squadron, providing escort for Boeing B-17 bombers, claimed the destruction of 3 Japanese aircraft, While the tally was modest, this engagement revealed something entirely new. The P-38s actively avoided being drawn into turning contests, opting instead for swift, high-altitude passes. However, it was on December 27, 1942, that the first truly significant shockwave reverberated through Japanese naval aviation. 12 P-38s from the 39th Fighter Squadron intercepted a Japanese force over Doadorura, New Guinea. The engagement was brief but decisive. The P-38s, maintaining their altitude advantage and adamantly refusing to engage in maneuvering combat, decimated multiple Japanese aircraft while sustaining negligible losses. The war diary of the 4th Air Group of the Japanese Navy, recovered after the conflict, documented a mounting sense of unease. December 1942. Twin-engine fighters are appearing over our bases at altitudes we struggle to reach. When our fighters climb to engage, they dive through our formations with exceptional speed, fire, and then climb away before we can effectively react. The most perplexing aspect for the Japanese pilots was the P-38's apparent invulnerability to their established tactics. The Zero's legendary maneuverability, which had dominated every adversary since its introduction in China, seemed utterly irrelevant against an enemy that refused to turn. The intelligence failure became increasingly apparent. By January of 1943, the Japanese intelligence assessment of the P-38 had been revised, yet it continued to reflect a dangerous underestimation of the aircraft's capabilities. The report, distributed to all fighter units, stated, "The Lockheed twin-engine fighter represents an embodiment of American industrial philosophy rather than combat effectiveness. Our assessment indicates a maximum speed estimated at 350 miles per hour, a service ceiling of approximately 30,000 feet, and a range of 500 to 600 miles. Its armament consists of machine guns mounted in the nose. Tactical assessment. This aircraft's considerable weight and complexity render it vulnerable to our fighters in traditional combat. Pilots should endeavor to force close-range engagements where our superiority is absolute." The reality, however, was starkly different. The P-38G models deployed to the Pacific were capable of achieving 400 miles per hour in level flight, ascending to 40,000 feet, and, with the aid of drop tanks, could strike targets over 1,000 miles away. The concentrated firepower of 450 caliber machine guns and 120 millimeter cannon housed in the nose delivered devastating accuracy. By January of 1943, American pilots had developed tactics specifically designed to leverage the P-38's inherent advantages. Major John Mitchell, who would later lead the mission to intercept Admiral Yamamoto, was instrumental in refining these tactics with the 139th Fighter Squadron. The fundamental principle was straightforward. Never relinquish the energy advantage by engaging in maneuver combat with Japanese fighters. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea, unfolding from March the 2nd to 4th, 1943, provided irrefutable evidence that should have shattered Japanese complacency. P-38 EUIs had provided top cover as American and Australian bombers systematically annihilated a Japanese convoy attempting to reinforce Leh. 8 transport ships and 4 destroyers were sunk. The P-38s claimed numerous aerial victories while effectively safeguarding the attacking bombers. Japanese survivor accounts, documented in post-war interrogations, described the P-38s maintaining their positions at altitudes that the Zero escort struggled to attain. When the Japanese fighters finally ascended to engage, they found themselves at a significant energy disadvantage that proved fatal. Yet even this devastating loss was rationalized within Japanese reports. The official assessment attributed the disaster to numerical inferiority and the element of surprise, rather than acknowledging the undeniable American technological and tactical superiority. This ingrained institutional denial would persist until it was far too late. The fatal miscalculation occurred on April 1, 1943. Operation I-Go, Admiral Yamamoto's ambitious aerial counteroffensive, was launched from Rabaul. The campaign's objective was to obliterate American air power in the Solomons and unequivocally demonstrate continued Japanese dominance. Yamamoto himself had relocated to the front to personally direct operations. The outcomes of Operation I-Go were catastrophically misrepresented to the Japanese High Command. Pilots reported astonishing victories, claiming dozens of American aircraft destroyed and multiple ships sunk. In actuality, American losses were minimal, while Japanese aircraft losses, many attributed to P-38s, were substantial. It was within this atmosphere of manufactured confidence that Yamamoto made the fateful decision to undertake an inspection tour of forward bases, a decision that would place him directly within the reach of American P-38s operating from Guadalcanal. The intercepted message, dated April 13, 1943, originated from American radio intercept stations, which had successfully copied a Japanese naval communication encoded in the JN-25D cipher. After hours of intensive work, cryptanalysts at Pearl Harbor succeeded in decoding a detailed itinerary for Admiral Yamamoto's inspection tour. The message precisely specified that on April 18th, the commander-in-chief would depart Rabaul at 600 hours, traveling by a medium bomber and escorted by 6 fighters, with exact arrival times at various destinations provided. This critical intelligence was promptly relayed to Admiral Chester Nimitz, who then authorized an interception attempt. The only aircraft within the American arsenal deemed capable of undertaking such a mission was the P-38 Lightning. The designated interception point was situated 400 miles from Guadalcanal, pushing the P-38's operational range to its absolute limit, even with auxiliary fuel tanks. Mission planning commenced on April 17, 1943. Major John Mitchell of the 339th Fighter Squadron was entrusted with the crucial task of planning the interception. The flight path would necessitate a 600-mile journey to circumvent Japanese-held islands and coast watcher positions, flying at wave-top altitude to evade radar detection. 18 P-38s were assigned to the mission, 4 designated as the killer flight to engage the bombers, 12 as top cover to neutralize the Zero escorts, and 2 spares. The pilots selected for the killer flight included Captain Thomas Lanier Jr., Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Dykes Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine. Mitchell's navigation would have to be flawless, leaving no room for error in fuel consumption or the possibility of a second attack run. The entire engagement had to be concluded within mere minutes. The interception took place on April 18, 1943. At 7:10 hours, 16 P-38s lifted off from Guadalcanal's Fighter Strip 2. 2 aircraft were immediately grounded due to mechanical issues. The remaining 14 aircraft flew for 2 hours and 20 minutes at an altitude of 50 feet above the ocean, maintaining absolute radio silence and navigating solely by compass and clock. At 9:34, precisely as planned, Lieutenant Doug Canning spotted the Japanese formation. 2 Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers flying in trail, shadowed by 6 Zero escorts maneuvering above them. Mitchell's navigation had been impeccable. Captain Lanier and Lieutenant Barber jettisoned their belly tanks and climbed to attack. What transpired next remains one of the most intensely scrutinized moments in aviation history. Both pilots would later claim responsibility for downing Yamamoto's bomber, but post-war analysis of Japanese records and evidence from the crash site strongly indicates that Barber's guns inflicted the critical damage. The lead bomber's right engine erupted in flames, its wings tore away, and the aircraft carrying Admiral Yamamoto plunged into the dense jungle canopy of Bougainville. The second bomber, carrying Vice Admiral Mitsuaki Ugaki, was also shot down, but crashed into the sea. Ugaki, however, survived. Only 1 P-38 was lost. Lieutenant Raymond Hine, last seen with a Zero on his tail, heading out over the ocean. The shattering impact was felt at 1400 hours on April 18, 1943, in Rabaul. When the surviving Zeros returned and reported the ambush, Japanese naval headquarters initially refused to believe that Yamamoto could have been killed. A search party discovered the wreckage the following day. Yamamoto's body, ejected clear of the aircraft, had been instantly killed by 25 caliber rounds. The psychological repercussions for the Japanese Navy were devastating. Yamamoto was more than just a commander. He was a potent symbol of Japanese naval superiority. The fact that he could be hunted and killed at a precise time and location orchestrated by the Americans demonstrated a level of intelligence gathering and operational capability that the Japanese had deemed impossible. Captain Watanabe, who led the recovery party, reported, "The admiral was found still clutching his ceremonial sword. He maintained his dignity even in death, but the precision of the American attack appearing at exactly the right moment, at exactly the right place, shattered our confidence completely. The intelligence revolution ignited by the successful interception of Yamamoto forced a complete reassessment of the P-38 within Japanese naval aviation. A new assessment, issued on May 1, 1943, and marked most urgent all units, revealed the staggering extent of previous miscalculations. It stated, previous assessments of the Lockheed Type L fighter are hereby rescinded based on combat analysis and the events of April 18th. Actual capabilities are assessed as maximum speed exceeds 400 miles per hour, service ceiling exceeds 40,000 feet, combat range exceeds 100 miles, exceeds 1,000 miles with auxiliary tanks. Armament, concentrated firepower vastly exceeding initial estimates. Climb rate superior to all Japanese fighters above 15,000 feet. Critical warning, this aircraft represents capabilities beyond previous experience. Avoid combat unless possessing clear tactical advantage. The tactical revolution that followed in May of 1943 brought fundamental alterations to Japanese fighter tactics, all driven by the looming threat of the P-38. The Imperial Japanese Navy issued new combat directives that dramatically reversed years of established doctrine when engaging twin-engine American fighters. The directives explicitly instructed pilots, do not attempt to match their climb above 20,000 feet. Do not follow them in high-speed dives. Attack only when they are committed to ground attack or bomber escort. Disengage if they maintain an altitude advantage. These directives represented a complete repudiation of Japanese fighter philosophy, which had historically prioritized aggressive engagement and spiritual superiority over material considerations. The accumulating losses throughout 1943 saw the P-38 systematically dismantle Japanese air power in the Solomons and New Guinea. The toll on experienced pilots was catastrophic. Unlike American pilots who often survive being shot down due to effective rescue operations, and the P-38's remarkable ability to return on a single engine, Japanese pilot losses were typically fatal. By September of 1943, the majority of Japan's pre-war trained pilots had perished. Their replacements, hastily processed through abbreviated training programs, lacked both the skills and the experience necessary to compete with increasingly proficient American P-38 pilots. The statistics were damning. The average Japanese pilot flight hours before combat in 1943 stood at 200, while their American P-38 counterparts averaged over 400. The Japanese pilot survival rate after 10 missions was a mere 40%, contrasting sharply with the 80% survival rate for American P-38 pilots. In October of 1943, the P-38 unveiled yet another dimension of its superiority: the capacity to escort bombers on missions of unprecedented range, far exceeding the capabilities of any Japanese fighter. B-24 Liberators, previously vulnerable to interception, could now strike targets throughout the Japanese defensive perimeter, protected by P-38 escorts capable of remaining with them for the duration of entire missions. The mathematics were relentless. Each 38 pesos could escort bombers on 1,000-mile missions, whereas the Zero's maximum combat radius, even with a drop tank, was only 600 miles. This disparity meant that American bombers could launch attacks from bases situated beyond the reach of Japanese retaliation, while still enjoying robust fighter protection. In 1944, Charles Lindbergh, serving as a civilian technical representative, arrived in the Pacific to instruct P-38 pilots in advanced cruise control techniques. His methodology significantly extended the P-38's combat radius, with some sources indicating an improvement of up to 30% in range. Lindbergh also demonstrated the P-38's effectiveness as a fighter bomber, illustrating how to deliver ordnance with precision while retaining optimal fighter performance. This remarkable versatility further widened the chasm between American and Japanese capabilities. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of 1944, famously dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, starkly illustrated the complete reversal of fortunes. While F-6F Hellcats bore the primary responsibility for fighter combat, P-38s operating from land bases provided long-range cover and reconnaissance, playing a crucial role in orchestrating what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japanese naval aviation, once considered the world's elite, was systematically decimated. The few surviving Japanese pilots reported that American fighters, including the P-38, seemed to be omnipresent, always possessing the altitude advantage and consistently outnumbering them. Throughout 1944, American P-38 pilots in the Pacific engaged in what they termed the ACE race. The statistics unequivocally tell the story. Major Richard Bong achieved 40 victories, all in P-38s. Major Thomas McGuire scored 38, also exclusively in P-38s. Colonel Charles MacDonald accumulated 27 victories, and Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Johnson tallied 22. These remarkable scores, achieved within approximately 2 years of combat, surpassed the victory totals of most surviving Japanese aces, who had been flying since 1937. The P-38 had evolved into not merely a fighter aircraft, but a veritable ace-making machine. By 1945, Japanese naval aviation had effectively ceased to exist as a cohesive fighting force. The P-38, alongside other American fighter types, had systematically eradicated not only aircraft, but also the entirety of Japanese naval aviation's institutional knowledge. A post-war Japanese technical evaluation revealed the profound extent to which they had misjudged American engineering prowess. The evaluation noted the P-38 represented design concepts we failed to comprehend. Redundancy over simplicity, twin engines providing survival capability, energy tactics over maneuver tactics, firepower concentration over dispersion, multi-role capability over specialization, pilot protection over weight savings. Every feature we dismissed as excessive proved decisive in actual combat. The statistics underscore the narrative. In the Pacific theater, P-38s were credited with destroying over 1,800 confirmed Japanese aircraft, including Admiral Yamamoto's G-4M on April 18, 1943. A total of 10,037 P-38 aircraft were produced, with peak monthly production exceeding 400 in 1944. P-38 sorties in the Pacific numbered over 65,000, encompassing fighter sweeps, bomber escorts, ground attack, and reconnaissance missions, with an average mission range exceeding 600 miles. The impact of the Yamamoto mission, according to post-war Japanese assessments, was devastating and irreversible on morale. Strategically, it resulted in the loss of Japan's most capable naval strategists, and psychologically, it demonstrated that no Japanese leader was beyond the reach of American forces. The industrial reality presented a stark contrast. While Japan struggled to produce 300 to 400 fighters monthly across all types combined, Lockheed alone was manufacturing over 400 P-38s per month at its peak. Furthermore, America was concurrently mass-producing the P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, F-6F Hellcat, and F-4U Corsair. More critically, each American aircraft was manufactured using assembly line techniques that ensured consistent quality and incorporated continuous improvements based on combat experience. In contrast, Japanese aircraft, increasingly built by conscripted labor, using inferior materials, suffered from declining quality as the war progressed. The pilot training catastrophe proved to be the most decisive factor. The American P-38 training program in 1944 involved over 200 hours of initial flight training, followed by 100 hours of advanced training, and an additional 50 hours of P-38 specific instruction, totaling over 400 hours before combat deployment. Japanese pilot training in 1944, however, involved a mere 100 to 150 flight hours before combat, often with less than 20 hours specifically on type, due to a lack of fuel for extensive training and the reassignment of instructors to combat duty. The consequence was predictable. American P-38 pilots entered combat with extensive training and joined squadrons comprised of experienced veterans who readily imparted their combat wisdom. Conversely, Japanese pilots arrived barely proficient in formation flying and frequently perished on their initial missions. The strategic impact of the P-38's long range fundamentally reshaped Pacific strategy. Japanese planning documents from 1944 reveal how the P-38's reach severely constrained their operations, stating, "All fleet movements must account for 38 reconnaissance and strike capability. Daylight operations within their range invite destruction." This restricts our operational flexibility to an intolerable degree. The Japanese Navy's inability to operate freely in daylight within the P-38's operational range, which by 1944 encompassed most of the Western Pacific, irrevocably altered the dynamics of the war. By late 1944, the P-38J and L models had addressed every identified deficiency from combat operations. Enhanced engines, hydraulically boosted ailerons, improved cockpit heating, and dive brakes rendered the Lightning superior in every performance regime. Japan, meanwhile, found itself in a difficult position, struggling to keep its aging Zero fighters operational. With no available resources to develop or manufacture more advanced aircraft in significant quantities, their efforts were severely hampered. Late in the war, Japanese aircraft like the N-1K-2J, George and the Ki-84 Frank were indeed impressive designs, but they arrived too late and in numbers too small to alter the course of the conflict. Accounts from those who survived offer a profound insight. Post-war debriefings of Japanese pilots who had survived the fighting revealed a complete re-evaluation of their perception of the P-38. In 1946, Lieutenant Commander Sadamu Kamachi, when interviewed, stated, "We entered the war convinced that our resolve and skill surpassed mere American materialism." He continued, "The P-38 demonstrated that well-executed technology triumphs over sheer willpower. Courage alone cannot overcome the laws of physics." Captain Teo Tanameo, credited with 32 aerial victories and a survivor of the war, recalled, "The P-38 wasn't the best at turning, nor the fastest, nor the highest flyer, but it performed adequately in all areas, and it was ubiquitous. We referred to them as twin-tailed specters because they seemed to be present wherever our missions took us." Reflecting on its impact, a joint U.S.-Japanese aviation history symposium was held in 1962, bringing together veterans from both sides to discuss the P-38's significance. Former Captain Minoru Gender, who by then was a member of Japan's parliament, candidly admitted, "The P-38 was the initial undeniable indication that we had fundamentally misjudged the nature of modern warfare." Its role in the demise of Admiral Yamamoto represented more than just the death of an individual. It signified the demise of our entire strategic doctrine. Our belief was that wars were won by superior combatants. The Americans proved that wars are won by superior operational systems. In response, former Major John Mitchell, who had commanded the mission that targeted Admiral Yamamoto, remarked, "We were unable to construct a fighter that could outmaneuver a Zero. Therefore, we devised one that rendered such maneuvering unnecessary." That embodies the American approach. If you cannot win on their terms, redefine the entire contest. At a gathering of Pacific Theater veterans in Hawaii in 1985, surviving Japanese naval aviator Kenji Yanaga, who had provided escort for Admiral Yamamoto, shared his reflections. "We underestimated your 38 pesos in 1942 because we evaluated it against our own criteria. We prized aesthetic refinement. You prioritized tangible results. We sought perfection in a single aspect. You aimed for competence across the board. We forged the ultimate blade. You engineered a firearm that rendered blades obsolete." He elaborated, "The elimination of Admiral Yamamoto was not merely a successful operation, it was a stark demonstration." The message conveyed was that America possessed the capability to project power anywhere and strike any target with an aircraft we had dismissed as impractical. However, the most crucial takeaway was this: the P-38 impressed upon us that modern conflict is not about individual prowess, but about integrated systems. Not about the warrior spirit, but about industrial might. Not about elegant theoretical solutions, but about practical, deployable ones. We found the P-38 amusing in 1942. By April 18, 1943, it had claimed the life of our most distinguished admiral. By 1944, it dominated our airspace. The amusement ceased entirely when we recognized we were not engaging individual pilots, but an entire industrial apparatus capable of mass-producing quality. To the aviators who piloted the Lightning, you did not simply win a war, you irrevocably altered the very methodology of future warfare. The numbers that truly mattered underscore this transformation. Admiral Yamamoto's demise on April 18, 1943, represented more than the loss of a brilliant tactician. It marked the definitive turning point for Japanese naval aviation. The P-38 Lightning had unequivocally proven that American ingenuity, meticulous planning, and advanced technology could traverse vast distances to deliver precise, decisive strikes. The 16 P-38s that departed from Guadalcanal that fateful morning carried with them more than ordnance and fuel. They conveyed a potent message. The era of industrialized warfare had truly arrived. Future conflicts would be decided not by the valor of individual combatants, but by the capacity to manufacture superior weaponry in overwhelming quantities, to train pilots through systematic programs, and to deploy technology with strategic intelligence. From November of 1942, when Japanese commanders initially scoffed at the ungainly twin-boom fighters appearing over Guadalcanal, to April of 1943, when those same aircraft neutralized their most vital leader, culminating in 1945 with P-38s freely patrolling the skies above the Japanese home islands. The paradigm shift was absolute. The Japanese had ridiculed complexity, only to discover it was sophisticated engineering. They had derided extravagance, only to realize it was strategic abundance. They had dismissed the P-38 as being excessively American, too large, too intricate, too mechanical, only to find that these very attributes made it ideally suited for the type of conflict America was waging. Their derision lasted a mere 5 months. The repercussions, however, would endure eternally. The P-38 Lightning did more than shoot down Admiral Yamamoto on April 18, 1943. It fundamentally dismantled an entire philosophy of warfare, establishing that in contemporary engagements, the assembly line surpasses the samurai's blade, the slide rule trumps the warrior's spirit, and industrial calculation triumphs over individual bravery. They ridiculed the P-38 Lightning until it sent Yamamoto plummeting from the sky. Following that event, the only audible sound was the steady hum of twin Allison engines, projecting American might wherever and whenever it was strategically deployed. The lightning had struck, signifying the end of the samurai's era and the dawn of the American century. The 16 P-38s responsible for Yamamoto's interception, flying 435 miles from Guadalcanal, navigated by compass and clock, intercepted their objective within 1 minute of the planned schedule, concluded their engagement in under 10 minutes of combat, and returned with the loss of only a single aircraft. This was not a matter of chance or serendipity. It was the meticulously designed and flawlessly executed culmination of American planning, training, and technological prowess. The Japanese commanders who had scoffed at the P-38 in November of 1942 learned the most brutal lesson of modern warfare. Never equate difference with inferiority, never mistake complexity for vulnerability, and never dismiss the future when it arrives on twin engines. Armed with American firepower and guided by American resolve, the P-38 Lightning delivered the ultimate retort, its echo reverberating across the Pacific until the imperial sun finally set on August 15, 1945.